A volcano at your back, cicadas in the green. If a single season could shape your life, it is this one. Hi, welcome to the Book Corner with me, Mish Atagana. Let's discover new worlds together. Welcome back to the Book Corner. I'm Mish Atagana, and today we are talking about Summer at Mount Asama. This book was sent to me by Jonathan Ball Publishers. I think I'd had coffee with Shakti from Jonathan Ball, and I'd said to her, I think I'd just gotten back from Japan actually, and I'd said to her how I am obsessed with Japanese authors, obsessed with everything Japan, which I am. And most of the season feels like it's just Japanese themed. There are other books in the season. So she said to me, there's a book I want to send you. I think you really love it. The irony of this is a few weeks before she sent me that message, I'd actually seen this book at a bookstore. I can't remember where. And I looked at it, and the only reason I didn't buy it was because I didn't want a heavy luggage. That was actually my only reason for not buying it. I felt my luggage was too heavy, and I made a note to get it on Kindle and read it. So Kismet intervened, and she sent me this book, and I started reading it and absolutely completely fell in love with it. This book is very much one of those, it's a slow read because we follow the story of our character Tōru through one summer that changed his life. And it's based in 1980s Japan. It's this young graduate Tōru. He's been hired into this architecture firm. It's a small but very prestigious architecture firm. And they escape the heat of Tokyo to go to this tiny town. I think it's called like Asama, this village that is that sits at the base of a volcano, and also an active volcano, no less. And the whole company just retreats to the summer house, and it's kind of like a half holiday. It's half holiday, half kind of like work vibes for them. And one of the things I really liked about the story is when you kind of experience it. And this is also one of those books that I did a half audio, half reading, the actual paperback, is that it feels like you are sitting in this kind of quiet village, enjoying your summer. The things that you experience, the way he describes things, our narrator, the way he experiences life in this one summer and the things that shape him and change him, they feel so transient, but they also feel so grounded in the reality of everyone's lives. So he joins this firm, like I said, 1980s Japan. They all escape the heat of Tokyo to come to this village, and in the summer house. And the summer house is like, they have like the summer house is divided into two sections, the women's section and the men's section. And then they have their offices with the drafting tables. And the kind of thing that cruxes our story, or the key element that's driving this narrative, is the fact that this the Murai architecture firm is competing to build a national library for modern literature in Tokyo, and they're competing with another architecture firm, and they are the owner of this firm. I think it's what was like Kyoto Murai. He usually doesn't take on these kind of things, but for some reason, the person who kind of commissioned this work is a good friend of his, so he's taken on this job, and they're thinking of how to build this library. And I love the way they talk about the architecture of this library, because I mean, as a lover of books and a lover of libraries, it was so interesting to just see the way they were thinking about the comfort of the reader. How do they create spaces for readers to enjoy books? How do they make sure the books, feel heroed and things like that? And it's just the way they go back and forth in this design and this creation of this space, this kind of hallowed ground for modern literature, I really like. So Tōru kind of arrives, he's fresh out of school, he doesn't really know much, and he needs to learn how they do things, because this is an annual tradition for this firm. They always come to the summer house in the summer to create. And it's also the way they live and work together, I thought was so interesting. Like their morning chores, everybody is responsible for the house. They have a schedule of who makes breakfast, who makes dinner, who makes lunch. There is like a kind of the way like their afternoon teas are set up, and the evenings, like it's so interesting. Like they sit in the evenings and they talk, and it just feels like the way the conversation moves is like that's quiet stream by this volcano that is literally backdrop in the summer house, and you sit in beside us just quietly experiencing the stories of these people, about their lives, about their work, about the work they've done in the past, and how they're thinking about this current work that they're doing and how it's going to affect and change how people view libraries and experience literature. I thought that was really, really cool. And there's also like a lot around like these four women that are critical to his life in this period, and they really shape him because we experience the story obviously from Tōru's point of view. It is he's a singular narrative in the story, but he also, there are moments and there are nuances of the other characters and how they say things, how they do things, that explains motivation that you as the reader understand, but our actual narrator isn't quite understanding what is happening, isn't seeing the nuance in what they're saying. So it kind of feels like though he is he's a single person narrative and a first point of view narrative, you as the reader feel a little bit omniscient because you can tell the way things may play out, or the intentions of a character by the way they think and act around him, and his responses, but not realizing that these intentions mean things. And I also like the characters. I kind of broke up the way the characters of this book are kind of affected the narrative in about 5 ways. So obviously we got our first person narrator Tōru, who is like, for me, is super interesting because usually when you read these books that are first person narratives, that is about a specific field of work, they're usually the narration of a prodigy or someone who is about to completely change the face of something. He's neither a prodigy, neither is he a rebel. He's just an average guy. And I thought that was so interesting. But it's like he's very watchful. He's super observant of everybody around him, and he's incredibly like malleable. So he's teachable. I thought that was super interesting, and he has an incredible talent for attention to details. I thought that was quite cool. And then Kyoto Murai, who's like the lead architect or the principal, they call him sensei. Like he's more about doing. So he teaches by doing. So he doesn't say you should do it that way. He will show you how to do it, and he will show you why doing it this way is much more interesting. So I kind of like that. And he's also very generous in a very quiet way. So there's no fanfare. It's very ritual based. And my thing when I look at this, when I think about this, and I mean other Japanese books that I've read, and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast and the other episodes about other books, is the fact that there's a sense of ceremony and almost unassuming quietness about the way Japanese author portrayed Japanese people. And I'm so curious. I have not spent enough time with Japanese people to be able to say that this is so, you can see this in life. Yes, in the time I've spent in Japan, I definitely experienced that. But I would love to spend more time just to experience, like with people, and almost like living with Japanese people, just to see the way that they have been represented in these pieces of literature that I've read. Is just this unassuming quietness and the ceremony and the way things are done. But there's no fanfare, but it's still ceremony. It feels like ceremony. So I really like that. And what I also like about this architect, that they all adore him because he's like a genius, and he studied under like this super gifted, famous architect who, like the book, like he designed the Guggenheim and things like that. And he's very demanding, but he's not cruel. Like he would be like, we need to do this, and these are the deadlines to do this, but there's no cruelty around it. We are doing it together. So he demands excellence, and he's exacting in that demand, but he's not doing it he's not doing it like one of those people that go, okay, you have to do this, you have to produce this, it's we have to, and they work in unison and they work together. to build this thing. So I quite like that. And I also mentioned like there were 4 women in the story that really shaped his life, and they really are the crux of this character. And there's a kind of a lingering discussion in this, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, is of the 2 women that are clearly both attracted to him, and it takes him a while to kind of figure out what's going on, which is quite funny. And there's like a housekeeper as well, that really, like, the way she does. I remember saying to a friend when I was reading the book, I'm like, it's so funny that this housekeeper that feels like she's turning household chores and logistics into a love language, which I thought was just so interesting. It made me feel better about housework, because I hate housework. It made me feel so like maybe I need to respect my housework a little bit better and things like that. So we begin the story. So I'll kind of give you context of who the cast of characters are, where the story is situated. So Tōru begins by imitating. So that, okay, they do things this way, I need to do things this way. So he begins a lot by imitation. And he begins with like understanding how they think about like modernity and tradition versus traditional design. And in his interview with Sensei, he kind of referenced a lot of the work he did around a church. And I think it's so interesting that in building the library, they keep going back to this church that he built, and how he changed all the chairs because there was an issue with the chair. No one could understand what he was thinking about it. But and it was like this nuance where it's actually the nails were not unison in the chair, so they had to change all of it so the nails could be unison. So it's like the little element that you think, and the attention to details that has there, and the way it kind of plays out is less a list of events that happen and kind of more a series of waking up and doing this. So where they talk about, okay, the one morning they made hash browns, and they woke up super early because the one of the women wanted to make hash browns for breakfast. So we see this play out in a series of things where it's more from when they're making breakfast to when he's like sharpening his pencil, and one of his colleagues says to him, we don't actually sharpen pencils this time of day because it disrupts the flow of work. We only sharpen our pencils at the end of the day, which is such an interesting thing to feel like they even have an allocated time to sharpen their pencils, just so they don't disrupt the flow of work for other people. I also like, like the way that our character really notices how people do things in other for him to also do things better. There's a scene where Murai like studies Tōru's drawings, and he says very little, like he just nods. And the suggestion, is to look again at negative space. And he's like, how are you using negative space? And in that small moment, I kind of felt like a door was opened for Tōru, for him to stop trying to impress the sensei, but to truly create based on what the work that they're trying to do. And I also feel like in some ways, a lot of the time when you're young and straight out of university and you kind of start working for someone you admire, there's so much pressure to want to impress that you almost forget to bring your authentic voice into the space. I remember when I started as a journalist and I would write stories. My first few stories that I wrote, I would spend so much time going to read my boss's articles that he's written in the past to try and mimic his voice, that it took me a while to find my own voice, because I kept trying to mimic his voice because I thought he would be so impressed because I wrote like him, but I didn't actually show him my voice. And we kind of struggled at that beginning until I started showing my voice and telling stories from my point of view and understanding the subject that I was writing about, because I stopped trying to impress and I started writing truly to my voice. And I think that's quite a strong, a strong contrast that the author uses here to kind of look at how young graduates often forget that, yes, you can learn from someone great, but in that you shouldn't lose yourself in that. You should that learning should be a way to find your own voice, your own way, as opposed to mimicking. I thought that was quite cool. And we also kind of when we kind of get drawn into the story of him and the women, one of the things that I kind of like was that there wasn't like a singular romantic focus. Yes, he does have one actual romantic relationship that we see take place, but even the way that unfolds is quite interesting. So he encounters these four women whose life intersect with the house and the work that they're doing. A former model who turns like the crafts, who's like one of their people. There's like a local who has the knowledge of the mountain, and that's the person who keeps everyone safe. Like who knows like when they need to leave, if there's going to be an issue with the volcano and things like that. And like one of his colleagues whose ambition literally matches his, like who wants to kind of start our own firm one day and things like that. And then we have a visitor that comes who's so kind, like it literally disarms him with her kindness. But none of them are kind of like, your manic pixie type characters. Like each time Tōru, encounters this woman, they teach him something about adulthood. And I think this is also something important about the story. Is like, yes, this person is this is their first full-time job straight out of varsity, right? So full-time job straight out of university. They are learning the craft, but they're also learning to be a grown-up. They're learning to be an adult. And the things like when I look at these four women and the way they intersect with his life, they teach him a lot about adulthood. They teach him a lot about responsibility and about desire. And it's all written again in this super subtle, careful way that you can actually miss it if you're not paying attention to the prose. And then it also kind of looks a lot at the. I think if I think about the varying ways that the story kind of creates things around like identity, career, and generational change. It's like, beyond the fact that he's learning this craft and learning to be an adult, he's also learning about the people around him, how they have been living their lives in this company, how the plan is always like people go off to find their own path. They don't meant to stay in the company forever. They meant to go found their own companies, and that idea of it's not supposed to be your forever job. I find super quite interesting. I also like that we are experiencing the story in this idyllic, beautiful place, right? Where all these things are happening, and there's some heavy themes that kind of come, closer towards the end of the book, and the things that we see the characters go through. But there's a quiet grace and a quiet beauty about that I really, really loved. And then I talked about the kind of him, the things he's learning. But this is also, there's a show that I used to love. Actually, I still love it. I mean, I'm going to go watch it after I finish recording this episode now because I just thought about it. It's called The Librarians. And there's an episode of The Librarian. One of the characters, I forget his name now, he's like the expert in all things literature, architecture, art, and things like that. And there's a scene where he talks about this one building, and he speaks about this building with incredible passion and fervor. And one of the other characters turns to him and said, "I thought art was your thing, not architecture." And he says, "Architecture is just art that we living." And I remember pausing that episode and going, "Wait, what?" And because when you look at a beautiful building or even a well-designed home, it really is a work of art. And architecture is just art that we happen to live in. And I will never forget that line. Jacob Stone. Is Jacob Stone? Ezekiel is the thief in the show. Jacob is the art expert and architecture expert. Yes. The Librarian. You guys should watch Librarians. It's really good. But yeah, so the one thing I love about this book as well is just how architecture is used as a metaphor for life and work. So architecture is not merely a setting for but it is the metaphor in which the story is grounded. So the process of designing a library, the task, like how do you think about controlling dust? Like they think about things like that. Like how do you control the dust in the library stacks? How do you make sure the chairs and the materials choices make sense for a fan of a library? So those become like a reflection of discipline. And it feels like the passing of knowledge is important. So it's like craft over speed. So let's spend the entire summer to build this thing so that we've built something that is useful and helpful, rather than trying to get there in a rush. So like for example, there's I talked about the whole pencil thing, like this routine of sharpening one's pencil, and like there's a commitment to it. There's like this idea of manual labor, to show that care in their craft. There's also a counter narrative around to this high speed tech world, because it's like this is 1980s Japan, and how it kind of fits into like their world where they feel like this analog startup that values the fundamentals of process. And you can imagine a country like Japan in the 80s where things are booming. I mean, Japan is one of those countries that is always super high tech. The information superhighway is very super highway in Japan. So the idea that there's this firm who kind of almost takes a step back of that, where they're building from one analog point of view and focusing on process and fundamentals, I think that's really, really great. This idea of also looking at how do they one of the things they talk about a lot is how do you bring traditional Japanese architecture into this library to make it feel more Japanese. So it's not just building this huge modern library that could be shaped like a book on the outside, right? It's how can we build something that honors the traditional Japanese architecture, which I really like that. And then I also like that there's this idea of memory, place, and time. I think our character Tōru is very, very, very affected by the summer, because this reads like him recalling the story of the summer that impacted and changed his life, right? And the idea one place in time can really shape who you are. Like this house has a huge impact on him. The people he meets, that time, and the things that happens in that time has a huge impact on his life. And then I also think that the idea of the idea of the ordinary, picking ordinary tasks. So the fact that morning routines of making breakfast, washing up the dishes, doing laundry. So they're doing laundry at specific times. I think those kind of things also, they feel so tactile in how one tries to live their lives. I remember when I was going through the last two chapters for me, where I had to actually take a moment, because there's a scene where Tōru has an encounter with one of the women, and it's one of those things where he learns whether or not he's the right person for this person, because they say something like, "Oh, I wanna have a baby by this time," and his reflection on that statement wasn't, "Do you want to have a baby with me, or are you going to have a baby with somebody else?" It was more him thinking, do I even want a baby? It was such an interesting. It was one of those. He has a lot of these quiet moments where he tries to figure out if the things he thinks he actually wants, or he's wanting them because the people around him think they're good ideas. And he reflects on that, but he's never fully taking charge of anything, really. I think the women in his life tend to take more charge of the moments than he does, and I think that's so interesting. I also really think that this idea of people being thrust into spaces in life where they kind of feel it seems like a good idea, so let me just do it, as opposed to do I want to do it. Tōru has a lot of those moments where things seem like good ideas, but he's not necessarily sure if these are the things he wants to do. So there's, like I said, there's so many moments of quiet contemplation for our character, and also little moments of like quiet panic that he has as well as he learns more about the sensei and his life, and the kind of person he also wants to be, the kind of architect he wants to be. So I really enjoyed reading Summer at Mount Asama. It's a beautiful slow read. So yeah, for those of you who need a quiet summer read, read Summer at Mount Asama. It's such an amazing story. If you've read this book or have other books like it that you think I will love to read, please let me know. You can find me on social media, GlobeMish on TikTok and Instagram, and I will see you on the next episode. And don't forget that I'm doing a giveaway of fantasy hamper this season. Stay tuned on social media to find out more about that.